Well, good morning, everybody. And really appreciate our worship team leading us this morning, and it was powerful. And I love just watching Lincoln develop as he joins the team. I mean, very good, man. I really appreciate it. Yeah. I love as our young people begin to move into leading and being active in the ministry of the church. It's a beautiful thing to see. So thank you all for that. And those, if you don't know, this past Friday we had the gingerbread bash, and thank you all who jumped in to help, to serve, to care for those who are coming in and loving our community. We had a lot of people come in from IVNS and just within our community that we got to share the Christmas story with and be able to speak the wonder of this time of year to these families. And so we thank you all for jumping in and diving in with that. Let's pray, and we're going to enter into hearing the word of the Lord. Lord, come and with might and power. By your grace, come and rest among us. And as we unfold your word, help us to hear it as it's intended. Your word to us today, that in it we would find life and hope and joy. We pray in the name of Jesus. Amen. In 2017, Kamala Harris has this clip, and it was going around during the election cycle and perhaps used unfairly, but she's making this case for her immigration policy and those who were her opponents and how she found it as a moral ill. And I'm not here to debate whether she was right or wrong or justified. I'm not talking about immigration policy today. You can say amen. Amen. All right. Okay. But we're not. She's making this case. But in her case, it's around Christmas time, and she begins to chastise the crowd, and she's like, when this evil of the empire going on, how dare we speak Merry Christmas? Right? Now, I understand what she's saying. And if you're viewing that there's evil that's happening, a moral wrong that's happening, to just blind our eyes to it and just go on as if everything is normal, I can understand being upset with that. However, for the church, Merry Christmas is this act of defiance. It's as we focus during this Advent season, and as we kind of talked about, Advent is oftentimes has the second coming of Christ at the forefront. It's not pre-Christmas season. It's awaiting the return of Jesus and the establishment of his kingdom at his first coming, and the realization of that in his second coming. And the virtues of Advent, things like hope, peace, joy, and love, they are not there for when the world is all right. They are there for when the world is wrong. As we await this kingdom to come, that we can celebrate and live in these virtues of Advent, the peace, the joy, the love, the hope of Advent, right here when the world is amiss. And so we say, perhaps in defiance of the world's order, Merry Christmas, because we know something happened there at Christmas. We're not turning a blind eye to the evils of the empire. In fact, it's exactly why we say it. Now, if you would, turn in your Bibles to Daniel chapter 7. It's on page 913 if you're using one of the red pew Bibles that's in front of you. But we're going to enter into, Daniel 7 closes off the first half and begins opening up, in some ways, the second half of Daniel, and we move into an apocalyptic literature. Now, what is apocalyptic literature? This is kind of before we get into the actual material. And if you were there for the Revelation class, this is perhaps review for you. But apocalyptic literature, it's characterized by wild symbolic imagery that reminds God's people under the thumb of hostile, dominant powers of the true reality. Right? That what we see is not, it's not all that there is. And it proclaims within this, using these, oftentimes wild symbolic imagery, these very, poignant truths. And as we get into apocalyptic literature, I want to warn of, I'd say, two errors in reading it. The first is this, what I would call the puzzle approach, which basically says, apocalyptic literature, there are all these little pieces of a puzzle, and once we figure things out and put it together, everything's going to be always neat and tidy. That's not always the case. There are things to figure out. There are ways that things fit in together, but even after you kind of figure things out, some things are just still hard. And it's not necessarily always neat. And the second thing is this. The second error in reading, and I think this is very common, that we read it in a way that produces fear rather than encouragement. Right? Apocalyptic literature, it is written in the midst of hostile dominant forces and proclaims, truths, that God's people will suffer, that there will be times of persecution, that people will die. But the point is not to say, hey, things are bad. It's to say, there is a God behind this. There is hope in the midst of this. There is joy, no matter how bad things can be for God's people, there's still joy. Why? Because God is enthroned in heaven. Summarized well by the scholar Ian DeGuide, he says, though the propaganda for the present world order proclaim that our resistance is futile, the apocalyptic writer refuses to be assimilated to this world's way of thinking. He has seen heaven opened, and he knows how the story ends. And with this, we are turning to Daniel chapter 7 as we kind of get our first step into some of this apocalyptic literature. And I'm going to be reading it a little bit different today. As he's going to share a vision, and then there's going to be an interpretation, and I'm going to read part of the vision and then part of the interpretation and move along there from that. So you're going to be jumping around a little bit. But in the midst of this, what we're going to hear is in the midst of, ferocious beasts, there is a God who reigns. So let's listen, starting at verse 1 in Daniel chapter 7. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he was lying in bed. He wrote down the substance of his dream. And Daniel said, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me were 4 winds of heaven churning up the great sea. 4 great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. The first was like a lion, and it had wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground, so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear, and it raised up on one of its sides. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, get up and eat your fill of flesh. After that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard, and on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. And after that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot wherever it went. It was different from all the other beasts, and it had 10 horns. Let's skip down to verse 15. And I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit, and the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me. I approached one of those standing there, and I asked him the meaning of all this. And so he told me, and he gave me the interpretation of these things. The 4 great beasts are 4 kings that will rise from the earth, but the holy people of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever. Yes, forever and ever. All right, so we have the first part of this vision that Daniel experiences as God is unfolding, what's going to happen on the human plane. And he gives him, these 4 different beasts. And one of the things that we notice, well, is the source of the beasts. Where do the beasts come from? Well, 4 great beasts, each of different from the others, they came up out of the sea. Now, for most of us, that's just kind of an innocuous little detail. But for ancient people, and in particular, ancient Hebrew people, the sea represented, something, not just a salted body of water. The sea represented, chaos, destruction, rebellion, right? And the idea that these beasts are emerging from the sea, it even harkens back to the beginning the beginning of the Bible in Genesis chapter 1. Right? God creates the world. He separates the waters. He creates, from the waters, he draws out land and that land is meant for a habitation, for animals, for humans. That land is meant to be, a place where God meets with people. And in the midst of that, outside of that, there's these sea monsters that God's created. These chaotic, part of this chaotic world. And we see references to this throughout the scriptures. Right? Here's just a small sampling. We'll see things like referring to Leviathan or Rahab, these chaos monsters that reside in the sea. And what the scriptures proclaim is that they're not like the other nations. The pagans, they had their own ideas of the sea and their gods would battle these sea monsters, and then from that, after conquering, that they would, form the world. Not so with the God of the scriptures. All this is under his control, under his domain. He speaks them into being. He leashes Leviathan. He tramples over Rahab. And what it's saying is that, yes, there are these beasts that emerge from the sea that are in rebellion to the rule of God. But God is in control. They are filled with chaos. They are, despite all their kingdom building, they are acts of decreation, ravaging the people of God, ravaging the world. And as beasts, they devour, they're terrifying, they crush, they consume. But God is in control. And this idea that the beasts are coming from the sea, it is symbolically proclaiming, what we know, what Paul proclaims pretty overtly, the spiritual nature of the world's kingdoms. Right? What does Paul say? We don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against rulers, authorities, against cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. What Daniel is claiming through these beasts, these kings and kingdoms emerging from the sea is, hey, they're part of these dark powers. They're in rebellion against the rule and reign of God. They ravage the people of God often. They ravage the world that God has created. And so it's no accident that John in Revelation picks up on this exact same image, right? In Revelation chapter 13, right? He talks about the dragon, which is the devil, and he stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea, and it had 10 horns and 7 heads and 10 crowns on its horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. And the beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet of those of a bear, and a mouth of that of a lion. And the dragon, the devil, gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. I don't know if you noticed, but in reverse order, John is using these beasts that come in from Daniel and creating this new beast. It's an amalgamation of these beasts that Daniel proclaims, right? It's, the Revelation 13 beast has 10 horns, like the 4th beast. It resembles a leopard, like the 3rd beast. It has the feet of those of a bear, like the 2nd beast. And a mouth of a lion, like the 1st beast, right? And what John is drawing from Daniel, he's saying, the empire that's out there is, what Daniel is proclaiming here in chapter 7. It's like all of the empire It's there. It's given authority by the dragon to ravage the people of God. And later on, you'll read that the dragon, or the beast causes people to worship the dragon, and the dragon causes people to worship the beast. And all this is this act of hostility in the midst of all these things. And what does the scriptures proclaim, right? You have these beasts that emerge from the sea, causing chaos and ruling by violence and consuming and devouring. Well, what the scriptures proclaim is that there is a God who rules over all that. A God who crushes Rahab. A God who tramples over the sea, quite literally. A God who leashes Leviathan, who conquers all these things. And as we read in Revelation 21, when it says the sea will be no more, it's not talking about the non-existence of salted bodies of water. It's proclaiming that God will once and for all get rid of the source of chaos and rebellion. He will rid this world of evil. As he proclaims these beasts, it should give us a little bit of consolation, right? That God is not unaware or naive of the evil of these earthly powers. He's not in surprise. In fact, his vision of these empires is often way more negative than ours is. They're not out of his control. All right, let's keep reading. We're going to read again from verse 7 and 8. And after that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was the fourth beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. And while I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up from among them. And 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. And this horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being, and the mouth that spoke boastfully. And we're going to skip down to verse 19. So I wanted to know the meaning of the fourth beast, which was different from all the others and the most terrifying. With its iron teeth and bronze claws, the beast that crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. I also wanted to know about the 10 horns on its head, and about the other horn that came up, before which 3 of them fell. The horn that looked more imposing than the others, and that had eyes and a mouth that spoke boastfully. And as I watched, this horn was waging war against the holy people and defeating them, until the Ancient of Days came and pronounced judgment in favor of the holy people of the Most High. And the time came when they possessed the kingdom. Verse 23, and he gave me this explanation. The fourth beast is a fourth kingdom that will appear on the earth. It will be different from all the other kingdoms, and it will devour the entire earth, trampling it down and crushing it. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will come from this kingdom, and after them another king will arise, different from the earlier ones, and he will subdue the 3 kings. He will speak against the Most High and oppress his holy people, and try to change the set times and laws. The holy people will be delivered into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. So then he goes into this fourth beast, and he says it's different from the others. It's more brutal, it's more vicious, it devours more. And he specifies particularly of how this beast is going to deal with the holy people, the saints, if you will. And because of its ferocious power, it's very easy to get caught up in it. But, let's take a moment and think, what is going on here in this passage? And who are these beasts? Who are these kings and kingdoms? Well, throughout Daniel, and we've kind of gone over some of this before, and so if you're new and you're kind of summarizing some things, but in chapter 2, we get that vision from Nebuchadnezzar, right? And you get that statue, the head of gold, the chest of silver, the legs of bronze, the feet of iron. And this is in some ways a following up of that same theme. Right? We have these 4 different kingdoms: a lion, a bear, a leopard, and a beast. And they correspond to one another. right? They're meant to be mapped on, and they will use similar themes that kind of connect each one respectively. In chapter 8, the next chapter, we're not going to be preaching through chapter 8, but we have the ram and the goat. And this is a little bit of controversial of how we're organizing it. And then, well, what is the identity of these different beasts? As we talked about when we went over chapter 2, we have the head of gold was Babylon, the chest of silver is the Medo-Persian Empire, the legs of bronze was Greece, and then you have this final kingdom, the feet of iron and clay, and Rome, or something else altogether. Now, currently in scholarship, this is perhaps the minority view. When they're looking at these beasts, they want to split up the Medo-Persian Empire so that it's the bear is the Medes, the leopard is the Persians, and the beast is Greece. Now, personally, I find this, despite this being the most common view within scholarship today, I find this view quite lacking for many different reasons. The first is that the Medes and the Persians are always together in Daniel. They're never separate. And in particular, and how the different details map on to the different categories. Like when we read about the bear, it says one side is higher than the other. And when you read about the ram, where it specifies that is the Medo-Persian Empire, it talks about one horn being bigger than the other. Right? You got the two, and one of them is bigger than the other, and how they map on to that. And then you have the four that's connected with the leopard. It has 4 heads, which after Alexander died, the Grecian Empire split up into 4 different kingdoms, which connects with when it talks about the goat, and it specifies specifically that is the Grecian Empire. After one horn is broken off, 4 emerge, right? And so primarily, as I think in current scholarship, this outline is rejected, not necessarily based upon the internal data, but because for many scholars, even among the conservative scholars, there's a hesitancy to say that Daniel actually prophesied, that Daniel actually proclaimed the future. And what they want to say is that Daniel was written very, very, very late, way later than we have, and he's only writing about the things that he has seen coming and going. And so it can't be Rome. It has to be Greece, which I don't find to be particularly a strong argument. But what is this proclaiming to God's people? As he's talking about these beasts, and particularly this fourth beast that boasts and proclaims, well, it's a reminder that, yes, these beasts, they come from the sea. They're filled with evil and chaos and rebellion, but no matter how ferocious a beast may be, God preserves his people. Despite the fact that this fourth beast attacks the holy people, despite the fact that he goes after and he blasphemes by changing the holy times and seasons, despite the fact that he makes war against God and his people, God preserves them. God will ultimately render judgment. And despite all his boasts and his attempting to snag for himself his own sense of divinity, God is the one who reigns. King Louis the 14th, he was a pretty good king of France, and he believed all the hype about it. Eventually, he was coming to the end of his life, and he planned his own funeral. And after the procession of his body through the town, and they come and they bring his casket to the front and center of Notre Dame. And his instructions were that the entire cathedral was to be dark, pitch black, except for one candle right there on the middle of his casket, the only light in the room. As the people came to pay their respects. The point of that was to reflect his greatness. He alone provided this light and levity. He alone, provided, it's just like, light and joy. And the people were meant to just reflect upon him and how he alone stands apart from all the others. And then the chaplain, Jean-Baptiste Massillon, he was the court chaplain, and he did all that was requested by Louis XIV. But as he goes up to give the eulogy, what he does is he snuffs out the candle and proclaims with a loud voice, "Only God is great. Only God is great." We need people like Jean-Baptiste. And in a world where there are empires and kings and all of them boasting about their own greatness, to view things in the way that the heavenlies do. Only God is great. Greatness is not attained, is not given to men like Louis XIV, nor all the kings that these beasts represent. No matter how much of the earth they devour, no matter how ferocious and powerful they look and proclaim, only God is great. And he is the one who will judge the living and the dead. And his people, who under the thumb of an empire, his word for you is that he remains faithful and true and preserves you from these things. Taking a step back of even just how this chapter fits into the book of a whole. If you've been here, you've gone through many of these things. Remember back in chapter 5, we read about the fall of Babylon. You remember under Belshazzar in 539 BC. Right? He sees the writing on the wall, rings a bell, and then the Medes and the Persians come in and conquer him. And after that, we get Daniel in the lion's den. We read that several weeks ago, right? So a new kingdom came, a new regime has taken over, and Darius is king, and Daniel continues to pray. He is punished for that. He's thrown into the lion's den. And what does God do when Daniel's thrown into the lion's den? Well, he shuts the mouths of the lions. He shuts their mouths. Daniel is preserved from them. And I don't think it's an accident that as we come to Daniel 7, and Daniel has this vision of these beasts, and we go backwards in chronology, go backwards in time to the beginning of Belshazzar's reign. I'm talking about like 556 BC, so 17 years earlier. And why does he move him back? Why does he move back in time in this chronology? And then he gives this vision of beasts. And who's the first beast? Well, it's the beast that looks like a bear. A lion. And who does that represent? Babylon. It's placed after all these things. And I think it's meant to be a little nod and wink to God's people. It's not just Daniel who's been preserved from the mouth of the lion. God's people have. Now on the other side of the Babylonian reign, that they have emerged and have fallen. Their time has been cut off. This dominant power that seems so, indomitable, unconquerable, above all, they're done. And where are God's people? Well, they just keep on trucking. They have been preserved from the mouth of the lion. They will be preserved from the mouth of the bear. They will be preserved from the mouth of the leopard. And this fourth beast, this last beast, despite its iron teeth, despite its destroying and razing the land, despite all that it does to trample the earth and God's people remain. Because we have a God who shuts mouths of lions. We have a God that no matter how ferocious the beast may be, he preserves his people. And so in the midst of all this, as he's proclaiming these beasts and their identities, but the identities of the beasts isn't the point. The point is, how does heaven respond as these beasts emerge and reign? Well, let's keep reading. Start with me at verse 9. So then I looked, and thrones were set in place. And the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow. The hair on his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming like fire. Its wheels were all ablaze. A river was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. Then I continued to watch, because of the boastful words that the horn was speaking, and I kept looking until the beast was slain, and his body was destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. The other beasts had their power, they're stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. And in my vision at night I looked, and before me was one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven, and he approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, sovereign power. All nations and people from every language worshiped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. Skip down to verse 26. But the court will sit, and the little horn's power will be taken away and completely destroyed forever. And then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of all the kingdoms under heaven will be handed over to the holy people of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will worship and obey him. And this is the end of the matter. I, Daniel, was deeply troubled by my thoughts, and my face turned pale, but I kept the matter to myself. So what is heaven's response to these beasts as they emerge and rage against the world and against God's people? The Ancient of Days comes and he sits. As one commentator so poignantly pointed out, he sits, he doesn't stew. Right? God comes in his glory and he sits down, and he's not fretting over this development that's happening on the earth. He's not like, oh, I didn't think about this happening. He's not befuddled by it. He's not thrown into a tizzy by it. He comes and he sits to do what he does, to pronounce judgment on the beasts. And his response to the beast is, well, one is coming. One looking like the Son of Man. And we get this distinction, this contrast between the one who looks like the Son of Man and the beasts. Heaven's response to all that's happening, right? They're different characters, right? They have different characters. It's not an accident, right? The kings and the kingdoms of this world, what are they represented as? Well, beasts. And what do beasts do? They devour, they consume, they destroy. In contrast to the beast, there's one that looks like the Son of Man. Preeminently human. Right? It's a different character, a different way of reigning, a different way of coming from that of the beasts. The beasts come with violence and crushing and devouring, but the Son of Man, despite not devouring, he reigns. The beasts reject God's reign, but the Son of Man, he exercises it. They have a different source. As we talked about, the beasts, they come from the sea. They're part of this chaos and rebellion. The Son of Man, where does he come? He comes on the clouds of heaven. Right? The beasts come to devour and consume for themselves. The Son of Man comes to rescue. He is the response of God to what's happening. They have different fates. The beasts will be stripped of their authority. The fourth one slain and killed forever. The Son of Man, his reign is forever and ever. And ultimately, they're a different being altogether. The beasts, through their devouring, through their crushing and killing, well, they seek a level of divinity, of godness. But what we have is here, which is perhaps one of the most important Old Testament verses for understanding the development of Christian theology, is that there's this one who looks like the Son of Man, but who is he? What kind of being is he? And we're struck even when it says in verse 9 that he says, thrones, plural, were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. And who's the other throne for? Well, I'll tell you who it's not for. It's not for the beast. It's not for the little horn, despite his boasting. No, it's for this one who looks like the Son of Man. And just even how perplexing this must have been for many people as they were reading it, that there would be one who looked human, and yet he's exalted into the place of the Ancient of Days, and to him all authority and glory and sovereign power is given. A kingdom that will not pass away. And not only that, but the nations come and they worship this, and it's talking about this one who looks like the Son of Man, and yet he is exalted as God. To sit enthroned with him, to receive worship with him, to rule over the nations with him. And who is this one? Well, if you know, it's the one whose coming we're celebrating in this season. And it's why when Jesus in Mark 14, and they're saying, well, hey, are you the Messiah? He says, I am. And you will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds, seated at the right hand of the Mighty One. And what is their response? This is blasphemy. This is blasphemy. Why? Because you are saying you are this divine figure who looks like the Son of Man that Daniel proclaims. The one that's going to receive worship. The one that's going to rule heaven and earth with the Ancient of Days. And he says, that's me. That's me. This Christmas season, or this Advent season, as we celebrate these virtues of hope and peace and joy and love, we celebrate them as not because everything is all right on the outside. We celebrate them because we have this vision of this one who has come and is coming again. This crusher of kingdoms, this slayer of beasts, this victorious warrior, this response of heaven for people under the thumb of kings and crowds and cultures that are opposing them. And he says, there is one like the Son of Man who's come. He is heaven's response. And what's surprising, what's shocking at some level is that the way that he comes and the way that he rules is not to outbeast the beasts. It's not to out-devour and out-kill and out-violence them. In fact, he goes and he reigns and he earns the kingdom from the most unbeastly action he can do is to give himself up to the beast and its power. To let the beast to devour and destroy him. And what we proclaim as the church, as what we proclaim in the faith, is that as Jesus came, the Son of Man came on that Christmas morning, as John says, he came to destroy the works of the devil. All of them. The power behind the beasts. And all that flows from the heart of the evil one. Of sickness and death and destruction. And as Jesus came on, he came, he's not out-beasting the beast. He came as the Son of Man to show us what humanity is meant to be. And to rescue God's people from the power of the beasts. And there on that cross, as he willingly went to, the power of the beast was defeated once and for all. As he marched up Golgotha, And the beast with all its power slayed him, hanged him on the tree. It was there that death itself was defeated. That the beast unknowingly disarmed itself because ultimately its power rests in the ability to kill and steal and destroy. But what was heaven's answer? It was to defeat death itself. And so Jesus comes, God himself comes and wraps himself in flesh, and he empties himself and goes to the cross to suffer. And there, as the scriptures proclaim, that is his throne. Lifted up to be glorified. And what the scriptures proclaim is, as you look to him, you too share in his fate. That when you die, in him you will be raised. And so what is he left with? He's been de-armed. He's been defanged. His claws have been shaven down, because what can he do to the people who have a God who says, I will rescue you from death itself? I have delivered for you this victorious warrior to trample the powers of darkness for you. Many of you know that our dear sister, Patricia Nace, recently passed, and it was and on her funeral on Thursday, and then I was able to lead the graveside committal the next morning. And it's in her passing, as many of you have experienced in the passing of your own loved one, there's something different when they know Jesus. And when their family knows Jesus. There's something light. There's something hopeful. There's something, yes, even in the midst of tears and grief, there's something joyous about it, because we know Pat has a conquering king. We know that as her body passed, that's not the last word for her. We know that she's with Jesus. That sickness didn't have the last word. That ailments didn't have the last word. Because God has given for us that one who looks like the Son of Man, and yet, what does he do? He renders judgment on all the works of the devil. Beloved of God, this is your God. In just a moment, we're going to watch just a short little video that, in some ways, summarizes this proclamation. And in it, I played this a couple years ago when Christmas was on a Sunday, but like 70 of you were here, so I thought I could play it again. I watch it every year myself, so it has replay value. But beloved of God, as you face down, I'd say, the works of the devil, as they seem indomitable, as they seem massive and inexhaustible, you can remember that there in heaven sits the Ancient of Days. So as you face things like cancer and disease and death and all these things, you want to, the point of Daniel 7, the point of apocalyptic literature itself, is not that you would fixate your eyes on the beast, but you would be able to see past the beast and all of its boasts to heaven's plan. Reality has been opened. And this is his proclamation to you. I'll invite up the worship team as those in the back will play the video.
There's a dragon in my nativity, dreadful and immense. The shepherds quake, the wise men shake, and spill their frankincense. The cattle are a lowing, and the baby is awake, while Joe and Mary tremble, Oh, this must be some mistake. There's a dragon over Bethlehem. I don't know how he came. I didn't think a donkey could have borne the dragon's frame. I don't believe the census had been called for such as him, and I'm certain that when Dragon knocked, no room was at the inn. There's a dragon by the stable. I don't know why he's there. He hasn't brought a present, and he only seems to glare. He hovers over David's town that still beneath him lies, yet no one's sleep is dreamless underneath his piercing eyes. This dragon isn't visible with ordinary sight. You cannot snap a selfie or televise his flight. Unseen he stands for every power that stands against the earth. The death, disease and darkness overshadowing each birth. This dragon is an enemy of all that's good and true. This monster lies and steals and kills. He's coming after you. Above each crib the dragon hovers, sure to swallow whole. Rulers, empires, beauty, joy, a flesh and blood black hole. But dragons always meet their match. They always meet their doom. A hero rises to the fight to cast them into gloom. And so at this nativity arose another player. The baby wrapped in swaddling cloths, he was a dragon slayer. He'd come to fight through Herod's plots, through dangers big and small. He took on evil, sickness, death, and triumphed over all. A dragon or a baby? Just who would win the fight? It wasn't really fair, you see. The child was a knight, from high above and long before. He knew what must be done. He knew the dragon waiting here, and still he chose to come. There's a dragon in my nativity, a fierce and monstrous danger, but fierce is still the bravery and love within the manger.